Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. If you are joining us from across the Pacific, good evening and good afternoon. My name is Michelle Maloney, and I'm the co-founder and national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us today in I'll just reset that, in our webinar where we're going to be discussing the wonderful and fascinating topic of bioregional law. I'm truly delighted today to have my co-author of a recent paper with me, the wonderful Kari Crisp from the US, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. But we're really delighted to speak with you about an emerging space being framed as bioregional law. But as many would know, and as we will discuss, this is drawing on very ancient wisdom. First, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the beautiful lands of the Kabi Kabi people. And if I look out across country up the hill behind where I live, I look out across the Glasshouse Mountains, absolutely gorgeous, and that's Jinnaburra country. So here in Australia, that's where I live, a bit north of Brisbane. Here in Australia, we like to acknowledge that we are on unceded lands and that it always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And we acknowledge all Indigenous peoples across Australia and across the world, and any Indigenous folks on the call today. So the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, for folks who may not know who we are, we're a small not-for-profit organisation. We focus our work in Australia, but we work with many wonderful colleagues, friends and networks around the world. Our interest is in increasing the understanding and practical implementation of Earth-centred governance. And although we talk about Earth laws, as you may know from the framing of Thomas Berry, Earth laws is all about governance, the way we organise our societies. So for AELA, our work is absolutely not just about law, it's a beautiful mix of multidisciplinary work across culture, the arts, eco-spirituality, education, ethics, and shifting the very structures of our society so that we can love, live, and respect the living world. Our webinar series about bioregioning is really important to us. As Thomas Berry and many other people say, one of the best ways to think about Earth-centred governance is your local places and your natural spaces and how they tell us about themselves, whether that's through catchments or bioregional definitions in other ways. So bioregioning or bioregionalism, we love to define it as a concept, a Western word, a Western English concept that sees human societies and culture as part of nature, and that we could organise ourselves and live a much more beautiful and meaningful life if we paid attention to our living systems around us, the unique qualities of our world, and governed ourselves based on really the greenprint or the blueprint of life that's telling us how to live here. So AELA is mildly obsessed with bioregional everything, and we're delighted to be part of a growing international interconnectedness. And in September, it will be Bioregional Month. And at the moment, wonderful groups like R3O, the Design School for Regenerating the Earth, many other projects will be promoted across September, and wonderful things to join. And Kari Crisp and her crew are fabulously organising the Turtle Island Congress, which she may be able to tell you more about. But keep an eye on the different websites that we'll share with you. Yeah, so the only other thing I want to do is introduce our gorgeous piece of work. So we wrote a chapter for the second edition of the Earth Law textbook, which is produced by the Earth Law Centre in the USA. Some aspects of that textbook are particularly focused on US concepts and structures of law, but many other chapters are about international developments and different ideas around the world. This is the first time they invited us to do something on bioregions, and that's why we're a little bit excited, because to enable lots of perhaps law students, particularly in Western legal traditions, to engage with what is effectively a decolonising view of the Earth and the Earth laws, it's pretty exciting. It's a great opportunity. So before I introduce Kari, just want to mention to you, you can actually access that textbook. Sarah's going to put a link in the chat for anyone who'd like to have a look at the chapter or the book. If the book is too expensive for you, then please do ask your libraries or get in touch with us and we'll see if we can get a copy in your local library. Okay, so issues in the chapter, obviously an introduction and framing. And the framing to us is really important because bioregioning, bioregionalism, these are based on an English word and it looks at bioregioning from often a Western construct. And we know that Indigenous first laws and other ancient systems around the world continue today and are also a deep inspiration for bioregional ideas around the world. What's really exciting about the book is we got a chance to stretch our legs and explore the important learning from Indigenous wisdom. And I want to honour and respect that Mary Graham's work on relationality, the way she articulates these concepts, is a basis for how we articulate into that chapter a whole range of concepts that are very important and worthy of understanding. And as folks know, I always like to acknowledge the work that I do in partnership with Mary Graham and other First Nations friends and colleagues in Australia, because that partnership work really is the future. All right, so that's enough from me until I come back after Kari and talk about the work that we've done in that chapter. So, Kari, it's so great to see you today. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for this invite. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to you all in this new audience, which I believe is mostly outside of the US, maybe some US folks here as well and other places. But yeah, excited to have this chat today.
Yeah, exciting. All right, I'll hand over to you, Kari, and then I'll jump in after you, and then we'll have a chat and see if there are questions from the group. So, thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Crisp, as Michelle said, and we're going to share a chapter today about bioregions and Earth law. So, I'm a PhD student focusing on the bioregional movement and specifically something called the Turtle Island Bioregional Congress. So, in studying the movement, I was asked to help contribute to this chapter, having that knowledge of the past 50 years or so, and that the movement has been around, at least in its contemporary form. So Michelle and I both see a huge opportunity here to try to move law in a bioregional direction. So first, I just want to say, you all may know what a bioregion is, but I still like to refer to this definition. It's my favorite one because it really takes an integral perspective in terms of what a bioregion is. So here it says that it's a geographical terrain as well as a terrain of consciousness, which I think is a very poetic way of saying that it's not only the landscapes that we're talking about, it's the human cultures that developed out of those landscapes since time immemorial. And so a lot of the scientific approaches to a bioregion may focus more solely on the characteristics of a particular landscape and leave the people out of it. And so what this definition does and what I think of as a bioregion includes both the cultural components of being a human as well as all the other beings and landscapes in that place as well. So I'm not going to go through these in too much depth, just kind of broad, that these are some of the principles that Michelle and I have organized in our chapter for how you can think about bioregional law. So this includes obviously a relational and ecocentric worldview, and, acceptance of nature as the source of law, which is quite challenging for the Western world. Also, an understanding and willingness just to accept that there are limits. We can't do exactly whatever we want. There are boundaries that we have to attend to. And then things like reciprocity and regeneration, these are maybe more familiar terms. And even looking at things like decentralized governance and obviously place-based, and then having an understanding of scale as well. So one thing I just want to address up front is that all cities are in a bioregion, but not very many cities, maybe really none at all, consider themselves within that broader bioregional kind of place-based perspective. Every city pretty much is integrated with the existing economic system, which is, largely dislocated, is how I like to describe it. It sort of abstracts everything into a global economy that is not grounded in a particular place and the limits of a particular place. And I think we're only really beginning to feel the strong effects of having to grapple with what that actually means in terms of going forward. There have been some, wonderful things that have happened. So the activist Peter Berg, who's somebody I'm inspired with, his work around bioregional activism enabled San Francisco, which is the area where I live, to develop a Department of the Environment. So before his bioregional work, that didn't exist, for example. So there are things happening. Change is slow, though. So one example of how I want to kind of ground what bioregional law could be in a specific place is the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. And so this is a really interesting example because in the city of Toledo, there was an algae bloom that caused the drinking water to be basically undrinkable for several days. And so the city actually approved a charter amendment that recognized Lake Erie and its watershed as having possessing legal rights. And this included things like the right to exist, flourish, and naturally evolve. But unfortunately, this was struck down due to unconstitutional vagueness. And where we kind of need to go with this, I think, and keep in mind that a bioregional approach to law is prefigurative, meaning it's that it's something that we're trying to live into and isn't necessarily fully developed at all or even in parts in a place yet, but it's something we want to move toward. So an example of how we could move toward this would be like in the future, it would make more sense to have the cities around this Lake Erie, for example, so Toledo, Cleveland, Erie, Buffalo, and others, to work collaboratively on what those rights would look like, because then there's less chance of it getting shot down. And, instead, what happened was that the state of Ohio in the United States passed a law banning rights of nature in the state. So this ultimately had the opposite effect of what they were trying to do. And it's obviously harder to do that kind of collaboration, but I think that's where we're ultimately going to have to go is that people are going to have to start working in partnerships that they're not normally used to. And this includes also, obviously, all the indigenous people who live in the area as well. This isn't a totally foreign concept. I just want to say that California has already been at this for some time. In 1991, they developed a bioregional map that was focused pretty much solely on the conservation of species. So this was disconnected from any economic goals or objectives, for example. But the state has taken other measures to move the economy in a more regional direction. So California is where I live, and I apologize that I'm going to be focusing on the US in particular, just because that's where I live, that's where I'm most used to. But I think you can see these examples and hopefully extrapolate them to your place and see how they might be, relevant there as well. But anyway, back to the middle image here about California already trying to develop the economy in a regional way. So they've, divided the state into these regions, which you can see, which are a bit different from the bioregional map on the left, but kind of the same also. But then if you go over to the right image, this is focused. So the circled areas in the left two images are the Bay Delta area where I live now, the San Francisco Bay, like San Jose, Sacramento area. And then the image on the right is zoomed into that, and it's called the Northern California Mega Region by some of the state planning agencies. So again, like there's already movement in this direction of realizing that California is like such a huge state. It has a giant economy, the fourth largest economy in the world. And as a state government, they're realizing that they can't keep handling like economic planning in the same way. So people are moving toward this realization of getting more regional and bioregional, I think. This is just a map of the US that shows there already are these other mega regions, as they're called, that have been identified. And you may recognize Cascadia as one of the more well-established ones in terms of their story of being a bioregion and the work that they're doing. But even this planning agency has identified Cascadia as one of the 11 main mega regions in the US, where about 70% of the nation's population growth is going to come from, as well as about 80% of its employment. And these are focused around urban centers. So again, I'm pointing back to this fact about like, I think there's a real opportunity here to work with cities because they're nimble and they can move more quickly to move in a bioregional direction much more quickly than say like a national government. These are just some other maps that I created through my PhD work. The image on the right, sorry, on the left here, points to that Northern California mega region. And you can see, like, based on the black outline is the mega region, but the underlying areas are different types of vegetation, such as like, sorry, different ranges. So like the Coast Range versus the Sierra Nevada, which is mountainous. So this mega region is covering quite a bit of different landscapes, but it's not really this something that gets incorporated so much into the regional planning. And so the image on the right is just to show that like there's a huge urban population in this area spread across multiple types of different landscapes, but those landscapes aren't strongly influenced in their financial planning, I would say. This is just another map again to show that the concentration of the population in the area. And just one more note on that. This is just the image on the left is a custom map I had made to show the hatch lines that are reddish are the Bay Delta region, and that's situated within this larger mega region, which state and like city agencies use for planning, which by planning, I mean primarily focused on economic planning and transportation, but again, somewhat disconnected from the actual landscapes in that place. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that I think there's a real opportunity to kind of map between what existing governmental structures are already doing and the ways they might be trying to move regionally or bioregionally, and then do some storytelling and education around, why a bioregional perspective is important, bringing in more of that cultural component. So another major area I see to help move things in a bioregional direction with law is coordination with indigenous people who are still around in places. And so, for example, here on the screen, you see the right to rice, which this was a rights of Manoomin, which was a wild rice in Minnesota. There was a pipeline that was going to go through this area, and the Ojibwe tribe created this lawsuit against the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources to oppose this pipeline. And this was the first rights of nature strategy that was trying to enforce treaty rights that had to do with indigenous people's right to collect these wild foods in the region. Ultimately, this was shot down as well because it was said that the tribal court lacked jurisdiction over non-Indians outside reservation boundaries. So again, I'm just kind of pointing to, obviously there are a lot of challenges to move in this direction with the law, but I think coordinating with indigenous groups and cities are two of the biggest areas that I see right now. I want to share one more indigenous example. This was just passed in January. It was a resolution to recognize the rights of long person, which is a beautiful way to describe, they say it's a living conscious being whose head begins in the mountains and whose feet stretches to the sea. And so this was a way that the Cherokee people in Western North Carolina talk about the waterways in that region. And so again, I think a lot of this comes down to education and storytelling and talking about our rivers and such as as being alive, like they totally are, but in the Western world in particular, we've really lost touch with that. I see, the law is powerful. It has its place. I also think there's a lot of power in storytelling. So I just want to share a couple of examples of film and how I think that can help, change people's hearts and minds. So this is available on YouTube. It's called The Future is Bioregional. It's a 9-minute video that if you're newer to the bioregional concept, I recommend it. It's also at the end of it mentions an event that I'm planning for later in September outside Portland, Oregon, called the Turtle Island Bioregional Congress. So I'll share more about that in just one second. And then just one more example of film. This was called Last Stand, Saving the Elwha River's Legacy Forests. And this is up in Cascadia. And this is a 20-minute short documentary, also available on YouTube, that talks about some of the efforts in in the Elwha watershed, which is on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, where an activist lawyer from the Earth Law Center was collaborating with some indigenous groups to work on saving some legacy forests there in the area that were on the chopping block by timber companies. And they were able to partially save a portion of this forest, in part due to this storytelling through film. I just want to share this example. If folks haven't seen this resource, it's awesome for finding out more about all the different rights of nature and other eco laws that are happening, getting passed all over the world. It's called the Eco Jurisprudence Monitor. If you just search that, it should come right up. There are a few ways that you can engage if you want to know more. So Michelle and I are hosting a research group that we started on a platform called Hilo, which I'll share more about that in just a second. And then you can watch the intro video that I just mentioned. And then I mentioned also this event that's going to be happening later in September outside Portland, Oregon, Vernonia in the United States. And it's going to bring 300 place-based leaders together to try to strengthen our ecological and cultural resilience and hopefully align on some strategies coming out of this. And so one thing I would love to see is bioregions coming together to talk about what is happening in our place, what could we do with the law, what is happening with the law, start to brainstorm some really concrete ways on how to move this forward in our local areas. I already mentioned Hilo. I just want to mention that one more time because it's a nonprofit platform where a lot of people who are interested in place-based organizing are already coalescing around. And these are some groups that are available on there now, such as the Bioregional Commons. And then there's the research group that I mentioned that Michelle and I are hosting, and it's called Bioregions and Earth Law. And I can drop a link to that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it, Michelle. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of that. And I do really encourage folks to watch that beautiful video. I know Carrie was involved in writing and producing it, and I want one for Australia. And what I want to put a note out to everybody is that we need more short films and beautiful stories about earth laws and our bioregions. So if anyone has contacts in the filmmaking world or someone who might want to come and chat with us, this is a very serious offer to collaborate. But thank you so much. All right, Kari, I will now just share some thoughts and ideas from our wonderful chapter, which we're plugging as if we're making money out of it. We're not, because we love the topic. It's very, very important. All right, let me get back to my recalcitrant slides that may or may not cooperate on the first go. There we go. All right, so thank you so much, Carrie. And as Carrie talked about, the realm of exploring bioregional law can be tricky and contentious. And if not only because I remember someone saying to me, do you really think law is the best tool for the fluidity of bioregional activities, etc.? I'm going to share with you an argument for why law is the ultimate tool for ensuring we think, work, play, and love in a bioregional, earth-centered way, but perhaps not law in the way that you're thinking about it. So I'm going to talk very briefly about, well, what is law anyway? And then I'll touch on some of the barriers within Western law that exist already to adopting a bioregional approach. And, Carrie already touched on some of the emerging opportunities and systems that are already happening in Western law. And I might explore a few of them before we open up for questions. So I actually want to take you all on a time travel journey. And if you've seen these slides before, forgive me, but I find them the most interesting and powerful way to remind us what law is. So imagine the world in the year 1400, and may I invite you to even ponder where your ancestors were at that time. It's often a nice way to think about the planet. What we know about the world in 1400 is that many different peoples across many different places lived in lots of different ways. Primarily, they lived a biocultural existence. This is the Aboriginal map of Australia. And as Mary Graham often says, that's not just a language map, that's a governance map. And Aboriginal people, as we honour and respect in our chapter and in all of AELA's work, are one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. and possibly invented bioregionalism, if you were to call it that, in those days. But it's not just Australia that was structured that way. Prior to the colonisation by Europeans of the world, there are many interpretations of how people organised, but this is Turtle Island. This is one map from around 1400, well, the map of 1400s societies in South America. Note the colourful patchwork quilt of different shapes and spaces. India has a number of different ways of articulating how it was before the Mughal invasions and certainly before the British. But you can see, again, patchwork quilt of different kinds of cultures. And if anyone has been watching our bioregional series, you will have seen a fantastic couple of talks by Shrishti Bajpai and Nisha Palus about the kind of bioregional work folks are doing in India to rethink and recapture cultural ways of being inside their society and governance. So the point is, prior to the European expansion across the world, these places were diverse and biocultural. And what I love to ask people is, when you look at this map, do you think that people were running around screaming wildly and being badly behaved? Of course they weren't. There were legal systems, deep legal systems in place long before the concretization of Western law came and started to shift them. And in Europe in the 1400s, what we saw was the continent of violence at war with itself and with everyone else. I don't mean to be harsh about my ancestors, but their craving and hunger for more of everything, brought about what people call the age of European colonization and expansionism. And what we know is that European powers first traded with, then often invaded and claimed many of the other parts of the world. European colonies of the world, there are very few places untouched by this way of colonizing. And of course, what does that mean for law? It means that places like Australia, instead of a patchwork quilt of bioregional governance, became under the rule of very straight lines most of the time and a very different kind of organising system. And the reason this is an important reminder is that bioregional law is actually the oldest form of human law. And within earth jurisprudence or earth laws, Thomas Berry suggested that what we have to do to really rethink our future is to look at the past and to understand how Western colonialism and Western thinking, it in itself not a bad thing, but when poured like concrete over other cultures and ways of being, perhaps not the most productive way to be a civilization. And Thomas Berry said that if we look at the four fundamental establishments that control human affairs, they are human-centered and extractivist or expansionist. So the Western industrialised way of thinking and doing is where the world is trapped in many ways, but not all, today. And law and government, economics, universities, and religion are the areas that he points to as places for potential change. So if we think about the law more generally then, and we don't just think, well, how could we make Western law look more like bioregional law, which obviously we do want to do some of, but I would suggest that decolonising the way we think frees us up to imagine even more possibilities. And so the barriers that we see today in Western law, the barriers that might make it hard to even imagine bioregional law, are some of these ideas that I've represented in this selection of colonial maps. So the colonisation of Australia, as an example, but many other places, brought to the place a set of ideas that built the law. The idea that nature is human property, that society is hierarchical, and that's totally fine. It's totally fine to have rulers and elites and people at the bottom who are either slaves, serfs, or servants. And that the law itself is fundamentally top-down. And for anyone who knows me, you know that I'm a history buff, and I've done a phenomenal amount of reading in the last 5 years over the deep origins of Western English law. And that top-down centralised control emerged gently out of the Anglo-Saxon laws in the 500s that started to shape the British way of thinking after the Roman collapse of the Roman Empire, and then moved through into feudalism and harsh hierarchical laws through the Norman invasion and beyond. This top-down hierarchical way of thinking about the law is baked into Western law. The state, the government, is supported by the force, the threat of force, and patriarchal laws, although falling away in many places, are still dominant. And I chuckle because I will never forget a statement that a friend made in a new economy course where he said, in Australia, there are more CEOs called Andrew than there are women CEOs of the top 500 companies. And I think that's a lovely statement to remind us of how patriarchal the operating systems are in our culture. But you can see that there's a whole body of work that comes with the legal system that has colonized other parts of the world. And I have to say, they're not all bad. You know, as a woman born in the 1970s, I'm really glad that I was able to be in a society that promoted my education, enabled me to vote, let me have a bank account. There are other cultures and places that do not let women do these things. So it's not all bad. But it's really important to me that people rethink what law is, because it's only if we do that, it's only if we decolonize what we think the world is or should be, that we can imagine a different future. So what I do want to mention is that in our little humble chapter, and I do invite people to read it, critique it, email us with critiques. If you hate it, please tell us. People like Carrie and myself are passionate about building a different future system for governance. We welcome ideas, conversations, and beyond. So within bioregional law, we look in the chapter at what's possible right now in Western legal systems and what's already happening. We see land use and land planning, rights of nature, legal personhood for nature starting to shift and shape Western law. There's also really ancient ideas like trusts, and a trust is literally where the people who govern the trust do not benefit from the trust. They hold something and look after it for the benefit of someone or something else. So bioregional trusts, Carrie wrote about them in the chapter, and I mentioned bioregional and localized economies. And there's so much more. We had a word limit. There's so many more things that we can explore. And although law isn't everything, you have to think of it as the fascia or the structure that's holding everything in society together. The economy is held up by many things, some of which are law. There's many other free-ranging ideas as well. The other thing we talk about in the chapter, and that I'm personally really excited about, are things like shifting local laws, changing how local councils are allowed to focus on environmental issues. And it's a whole nother topic of discussion, which we'll be exploring a lot more in the coming 12 months in AELA's local council program, is the lack of power local councils have to support ecological stewardship or to make local environmental laws. It's one of the biggest barriers in Australia to bioregional law, is the power structure between state government, federal government and local councils. But the other interesting thing about local councils is that they are all literally the creation of an act passed by a state or territory parliament. Local councils are not in the Australian Constitution. They are only created by a state government, and that's made through law. And that law can be changed, and electoral boundaries can be changed, and even refocusing boundaries to more appropriately reflect First Nations knowledge and or First Nations boundaries with local ecosystems would be a phenomenal step in the Australian context. There's also a range of ways, and people already do it. So one of the reasons I show the maps and think about law differently is that while today in Western law, people really do see the government as in control of everything. Again, prior to many of the European notions of law, the people of a local place made the law, enforced the law. So community empowerment is something that is really possible and really important. And Australia is a little slow on the uptake of anything from participatory democracy to increasing a more fluid way of bringing people's opinions and decision-making into state-centred work. So what we do in an AELA, and what I'm extremely excited about, is the potential of building parallel systems that reflect bioregionalism, but also reflect First Nations justice and greater democratic processes. So there's a whole lot more that could be done, and there's certainly things that we'll be exploring, all of us around the world, and certainly AELA, over the coming years. So the only other thing I want to mention is we already have in Australia at least lip service to bioregional issues and bioregional planning. Under the EPBC Act, Queensland and I think 2 other states are exploring bioregional planning. Some of it is still a little questionable in terms of its processes for including communities, but we're watching this space and keen to be supportive of good developments. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. We'll open up to questions in a minute, but I guess what I really wanted to stress as I finally wrap up is that decolonizing our brains, our hearts, the way we think about the world is one of the very first steps, especially in a colonial legacy country like Australia, that really helps to then embrace the way that we might see the world around us. Because whether you look at First Nations governance or Western bioregional definitions, which is that image on the top right, Western science agrees that we have 89 bioregions under IBRA 7, or whether you look at the catchments and the river systems, and there's mini catchments within bigger catchments, which are in major catchments, and the whole world is fractal. So whether you look from a First Nations point of view and or from a scientific point of view or just the world around us, nature is telling us how she is, and the only way that we can live here forever is to build our governance systems to suit the bioregional nature of our places. That's what Aboriginal people did, one of the oldest, continuous and successful beings, groups. There's so much that we could do. So AELA's Greenprints project and many of our other work connects to all of this. So if you're at all interested or passionate, or you have a story you'd like to share in our bioregional webinar series, we would love to hear from you. So thank you so much, and I will take off my speaker hat and come back to being a facilitator. And I know that my wonderful Sarah Bashforth has been keeping an eye on any of the questions that might be coming in. Before we go into questions, Carrie, can I ask you to tell us a bit more about the Turtle Island Congress? Because it's been a number of years and it's a big deal. It's exciting to bring it back together. Would you like to speak a little bit about and promote it? And we'll put some links in the webinar.
Sure. Thank you for that opportunity. Yeah, it's something that has happened in the past, but it's been 17 years since the last one. So it started in 1984, and then the last one was in 2009. And so there were 10 of them in the past. But the tradition is that Congress sounds kind of like an official word, but it's really meant to be more in terms of the definition of bringing people together, coming together, and that version of congressing. So the tradition was that, 200 to 300 people would get together and the location would change. It was in North America, so most of them were in the United States, but two of them were one in Canada, one in Mexico. This one's going to be in the US again. But it brought people doing place-based work together across the continent. And yeah, the idea was just, and when it started, there was no internet, for example. So it was a way for people to come together and share what they're doing in their area and try to collaborate to, you know, spread that even further, basically. But then the movement, as people started to get older and their responsibilities changed with children and such, the tradition stopped after some time. So this is a bit of a revival to bring it back. And people are excited to come together in this way because we don't really often get to meet like this to discuss, what are we going to do about our places and how can we align with Indigenous folks, First Nations? How can we incorporate local marginalized voices into this process? So we're lucky to be able to offer scholarships for folks to be able to participate who might not otherwise be able to. So yeah, there's a lot of energy around it right now, which feels very exciting. I think mainly because it hasn't happened for 17 years and people are really hungry for the opportunity.
Mm. No, I'm excited because as an early law student, when I was reading about bioregional stuff, the congresses were really an example that I read about a long time ago. So it's really terrific. Good on you. I'm honoured to be on the advisory group for the Turtle Island Congress, and I would have loved to have attended. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's difficult for Australians who may or may not have had social media commentary that's negative towards the current administration. They're literally being stopped and they can't come in. So otherwise, I wanted to go and talk about Australia's stuff and connect with folks. But it links to a question that Mitzi has asked, which is a good question. Will any aspects of the Congress be recorded or shared later? I know that you're not doing any live Zooming. Are there ways that you'll be sharing that info with folks?
Yes, we do plan to film the panel talks and presentations, but a lot of it is it's not a traditional conference. It's a bit more emergent and some open space as well. So there will be aspects that won't be filmed, but we do plan to record the presentations that will be scheduled ahead of time. Yeah, and we'll
Wonderful.
put that, we have a YouTube channel where we plan to put that up later.
Yeah, wonderful. And someone's asked, do we have such a thing in Australia? I'm so glad you asked that question. AELA will definitely be hosting a range of events and activities for Australian folks in September this year. As we don't have any funding, we can't actually pull together an in-person event that quickly, but what we will be doing is a number of online activities and some regional workshops across September with groups that AELA is already working with in Nambucca Valley, the Somerset region, and a few other places. And I also want to do a shout out. I can see Mike Weiner is on this call, and he's doing amazing work with traditional owners up in northern Queensland. So Mike and I will be promoting some of their work in September too. There's a great question here, Howard. Thank you. He says, I think it's helpful to provide pictures of what a new world could look like. You've covered this in part, but how can you give a picture to people about their new life on a day-to-day level with the bioregional approach? Does bioregionalism have these pictures available? I might let Kari take that one first because she's been doing so much wonderful research.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because I think a lot of people are bombarded by a lot of negative images in the news, especially right now. And it may be there's a I'm immediately remembering something that Thomas Berry wrote about, and it's like when we don't even know what we've lost in a sense because when the natural world starts to die off, it actually impacts humans' imagination. And so we have lost to an extent our ability to even imagine what might be different or possible. And so this idea of showing people what it might be, I think is an important one. And we've tried to do this a little bit through the films that we've done so far. I have an idea for a bioregional series. Michelle, I'd love to talk to you about
Yes,
Australia.
please.
This is an idea I've had for some time, but sharing stories of people in their place and showing that what they're doing, whether it could be an artist or music person who's really influenced by their landscape and that's impacting their music. And so highlighting that story or showcasing some of the amazing rights of nature lawyers who are out there doing this work on the ground with indigenous communities and sharing those stories. I think those are fantastic examples that give people a window into what that world looks like and can be possible. And then I think just another aspect of this is that what we're trying to cultivate within the Congress is this concept of like a ceremonial village. And so, across time, people have come together in these like temporary village settings and it often to talk about politics. And so it's an opportunity to give people an experience of living in that different reality. And hopefully that can open up more windows in their mind of what's possible too.
Mm. No, that's wonderful. Thank you. Mike's made a comment here. Law tends to be state or federal or council. Yes. One law that may help one bioregion might be seen as negative in another. Many laws, especially local or council laws, don't have the funds to implement anyway. Yep. And Indigenous law is site specific and can be more effective if the local community is enabled. Absolutely, Mike. And I know you and I have spoken about this, and I'll just reiterate what I mentioned in my talk. The Australian legal system, inherited from the British, is inherently top down. And by that we mean people from faraway places make the laws about the macroeconomics or industrial development, and it could be at the state level or the federal level. And then communities are invited to comment. And then it's up to the community. The burden is on the community to try to somehow or get rid of projects that might damage their place. If you turn that around, and just quickly, my personal dream is to have a world where a business comes cap in hand to a citizens jury and says, we want to bring this project to your community. And then the community says, well, have you met our selection criteria for ecological health and social justice? And if they don't, then the community gets to say, go away and just don't come back. I mean, the world could work like that. It really could. But anyway, I digress. I have to apologize. I'm coming down with a nasty lurgy and I think I'm getting delirious on my cold and flu tablets. But I do think the future is shapeable and changeable. And I think you all know I know that. I believe that. Roseanne's written, the Congress looks amazing. Thank you, Carrie, for organizing and sharing. I'm also worried about border crossings. I hope Canada could have a satellite event or zoom in. Perhaps Carrie, Roseanne, if you're in Canada, you should get in touch with Carrie and make some plans.
Yes, absolutely. We would love to have our Canadian neighbors join us,
Mm.
and anyone from North America and other places are invited as well. I know it is a challenging time to travel to the US, so I don't exactly recommend it, but if you are able to make it and you feel comfortable doing that, we would welcome you.
Yeah. If I hadn't had a social media year of grumbling about things I didn't like, I would have definitely tried to come in. Oh, Laurie, thank you. Laurie said, Resilient Blue Mountains is holding a sustainability festival on the 26th of September. Would AELA consider participating? Absolutely, yes. Even without finishing your sentence, let's chat. That would be delightful. We're going to be reaching out to all communities to see what they want to showcase too in September. Yep, Mark Merritt's sharing that the local mob are proceeding to establish an Indigenous protected area that nearly covers the entire Ballingen Shire. Well, that's wonderful. That will mean, yes, very good things. Oh, these are great. And Ian Lowe, our beloved friend, Emeritus Professor Ian Lowe, Douglas Shire, when Mike Berkwick was their mayor, and Noosa have followed the basic principle of managing local living and tourist impacts. Yes, and Ian Lowe and others from the Noosa Biosphere Reserve will be speaking at a webinar, an AELA webinar one day soon, talking about their fantastic work up on the Sunshine Coast. For you, Carrie, what do you think Earth laws really can bring to the plate for bioregioning?
Yeah, I mean, I've taken a very circuitous route to even end up in the law. It's a bit surprising to me that that's where I ended up. I came from a background in corporate sustainability and then became disillusioned with that and ultimately came into a bioregional way of thinking because it seemed like pretty much the only way to avoid a dystopian future. And then I realized, well, there's a lot of power in the law, actually, obviously, and humans have created this system that we're in, the Western system, and I mean it can be changed, and it's happening all over the world with rights of nature, especially it's been exploding in the last 5 years or so on every continent. And so I think, change is happening. I think so for the last 50 years, this is kind of a long answer. I'm sorry, but I am going to get to my point. I think when we saw those first images getting returned from Earth, from space of Earth, and then seeing the new ones of Artemis coming, I think seeing the Earth like that is kind of like a religious symbol in a way, because it reflects to us like, oh yeah, we're all together actually on this beautiful blue spear against this really stark black background, right? And just remembering that like it's actually a very amazing, beautiful place. And another thing that what a bioregional approach tries to do, I think, is to remember the celebration of that, to remember our awe and wonder and the joy of being together. So, I mean, that's what I that's what I think a bioregional approach can do, and having events like the Congress helps us remember that part of it as well.
No, wonderful. Thank you. And exactly, that's why I love Earth Laws as a non-Indigenous person in Australia. Earth Laws invites us to critique aspects of our own culture that we know are problematic, but also to be creative in our response and to re-engage, although for some of us nature was always number one, I think, but to re-engage our governance systems in living and learning from the living world. So look, just before everyone goes, I want to be really cheeky and see if I can share with you, just to break out of the legal stuff. The Australian Earth Laws Alliance is multidisciplinary, and this year, oops, there we go. This year, our arts program theme is kinship. And if anyone's interested, visit the website early next week, not today. I'm about to update the arts page on a whole bunch of wonderful ways for you to engage locally, bioregionally, or on your own, sharing a whole bunch of ideas you can share through your virtual gallery, your own artwork. We're about to announce a nature writing scholarship. We're going to be calling on folks to share creative pieces about their love of the living world and their relationship with it. We'll continue our webinars, and November this year will be Earth Arts Week. We've got a whole bunch of stuff going on and lots of lovely people and artists and creatives. Even if it's a stick figure next to a stick dog, everybody is invited to engage, to share their thoughts and their love. On that note, we've just hit the 11 o'clock of the end of the hour. I know it's different time zones for everyone. Carrie Crisp, it has been delightful to have you join us, delightful to work with you on this, I think, important early initiative in the bioregional law pushback to Western law. And let's hope we have lots of opportunities to write and share these ideas even more. So I will say thank you and fare thee well, and leave it to Carrie for the last word.
Yeah, just thank you so much. And I'll drop my email in here in the chat in case folks do want to reach out if you have questions about the Congress or otherwise.
Yep, excellent. And Carrie, do be in touch about the filmmaking. I'm aware that Australia has so many beautiful stories to tell, and often we don't quite know where to find the resources to do that. So let's find some ways to collaborate even further on the beautiful stories of what could be done and what is being done. Thank you, everyone, for
Yeah.
joining us. There'll be another webinar coming your way very soon. Thank you. Bye.